Welcome to Channel's Business Globe with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Coming up on today's show, Oando PLC, Africa's leading energy firm, has successfully completed its $783 million acquisition of the Nigerian Agip oil company. The historic deal, which marks Oando's 30 years in business, was signed in London on Thursday. I was there, and I'll be bringing you those details shortly. And Enterprise NGR, a leading policy and advocacy group for Nigeria's financial and professional services sector, has released its 2024 State of Enterprise report. Obi Ibekwe, the CEO of Enterprise NGR, spoke to me about the findings earlier this week, and I'll be sharing that discussion with you. Then later, I'll be looking back at some of the biggest business news stories of the week. But first, net migration to the UK for the year ending June 2024 has been recorded at 685,000, a 10% decrease from the previous year's record high, but still notably higher than historical averages. The bulk of these migrants are non-EU nationals, driven largely by an increase in work visas, particularly in the health and care sectors, which saw a 91% surge earlier this year. The leadership race within the Conservative Party, unfolding against this backdrop of migration figures, has become a focal point for discussing immigration policy, reflecting both public sentiment and the party's new direction. James Cleverly is the most popular leadership candidate among Tory members, according to the first major poll of the contest. The Shadow Home Secretary was backed by 26% of Conservative members when asked their first choice to replace Rishi Sunak. Ex-Home Secretary Dame Priti Patel was second with 20%, while Shadow Housing Secretary Kemi Badenoch was third on 14%. Well, for more on this, I was earlier joined in the studio by our Downing Street correspondent, Simon Pusey. Simon, it's been surprisingly quiet in Downing Street this week. Of course, we know Parliament is on recess and perhaps all of the political pundits are watching what's happening in Chicago. However, there has been a slew of data, whether it's the economy or migration, that appears to have favoured the previous government's administration. There is a Conservative leadership contest at the moment. James Cleverly, who is the Shadow Home Secretary, he is running in that leadership, and he is taking some of the joy, shall we say, of this migration data. What is happening?
Yeah, and I think that's what a lot of people would be sort of mentioning, confused as to why Rishi Sunak held the election when he did, because a lot of people, I think, were thinking that migration figures were going to get a little bit better and the economy was going to pick up. And this has sort of rung true. And
autumn would have been good.
They could still be in power, and they could now be putting their case to the country and saying, look, things are turning around, don't give the... I'm not sure how much it would have changed. You know, the Labour would probably still have won, but maybe not by the huge landslide that they did. But as you say, James Cleverly was the former Home Secretary. At the time, he put in quite harsh or much harder restrictions to come to the UK. So there's a lot of foreign student visas are down.
Yes.
A lot of working visas are down. And so I think you're right. He will probably take credit for this. And it's not all good news. We have less people working from the NHS from abroad. A lot of people would say that that's not a good thing. But as we've been talking about for many, many months now, net migration has been a big problem for a lot of people in the country, especially for Conservatives. So it's interesting that he's one of 6 people who's going for the leadership bid. He's currently the favourite. And I think these figures will probably help him in that. He also did very well as Foreign Secretary. We've got to remember when he was Foreign Secretary, he played quite a big role and looked quite statesman-like in that. And in a field of kind of fairly meh, I'd say, leadership hopefuls, he's leading the pack. So I think this will probably help. He's currently on 26%, according to some polls, in terms of becoming the next leader of the opposition, followed by Priti Patel on 20%. Robert Jenrick's in there as well. He's obviously Suella Braverman's sort of was his mentor. But he's coming out with things like he wants to see Boris Johnson back in the shadow cabinet.
Goodness.
He's coming out with saying anyone who shouts Allah Akbar should be arrested on the spot. You know, he's kind of just shooting from the hip, trying to get as much attention as possible. Yeah. I think whoever wins faces this huge task, don't they, of uniting a Conservative Party where a lot of the candidates, we talk about Robert Jenrick there, Priti Patel, Kemi Badenoch, of course,
It's waiting for you to mention, Kenny.
On the right of the party are looking to try and win over reform voters. I actually think that's a bit of a sideshow. You want to be, if you're a Conservative right now, you want to be winning
middle,
you want to be winning
and
Lib Dems, don't you?
Absolutely.
You could win back all of the seats you lost to Labour. You're still not going to have a majority if you don't win those Lib Dem seats. So you actually want to be looking more moderate. But at the moment, the Conservatives seem to be switching to the right. So I think James Cleverly is probably in a good position to do that. And I mean, you've also, of course, got Tom Tugendhat. He seems to be more of a centrist as well. Yeah. But I think at the moment, it looks like it's James Cleverly's to lose. And those migration figures that you talk about, those economic figures that you talk about, that seem to be getting better, I think they do go back to James Cleverly in a way, because he did put in those migration visa restrictions, and so should take part of the credit for that. But yeah, whoever wins faces a big, big task of uniting a Conservative Party that seems to be being split in lots of different directions.
Actually, very briefly, I suppose I've got to touch up on the riots and the aftermath of that. I know there's been several arrests, in fact, linking somebody in Pakistan for spreading fake news. What is the latest on that? We haven't heard much from Sakir. Did he actually go on that holiday in the end? Not
sure about that holiday, but he certainly didn't recall Parliament, as there was pressure to do so. The riots have died down now, as does often happen when arrests start to be made. And they, as we said last time, they've speed tracked those through the courts, and some really big, heavy sentences handed down, which must really be to show an example to anyone else who thinks about sort of going
no one's going out, so it's obviously working, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I think, those protests, we may see more. It depends sort of what happens. I think there does need to be new laws do need to come into effect, or we just need to think about how in a digital age where things can spark so quickly online, rumours and lies spread so much quicker than the truth sometimes, and it's really hard to roll back that. How do we police that in future, or how do we go about that so this doesn't sort of flare up again? This person who was arrested in Pakistan runs this website that was one of the ones that said this was a migrant that came over, was on the MI6 watch list, even named the person, and it was a fake name. Everything was incorrect about it. But it's very hard, isn't it, to sort of track down those layers when it's someone who's living abroad who has no real ties to the UK and is just doing it for money. So yeah, I think it's in this new age of sort of social media and internet where everything flies so quickly, I think the government do have to sort of come up with some kind of plan, even if it is police coming out and giving some details that they otherwise wouldn't give because the attacker was underage or whatever it is. They just need to think about that to try and stem these riots in the future. Absolutely, change and adjust as necessary. Thanks, Simon. Thank you. Oando PLC has announced the successful completion of its $783 million acquisition of a 100% stake in Nigerian Agip oil company. This historic deal marks a significant milestone in Oando's strategy to expand its upstream operations and strengthen its position in Nigeria's oil and gas sector.
It's a mixed feeling day. This is another stage of a journey that started 62 years ago for Eni. We started in Nigeria in the upstream operation in 62, and it was a wonderful journey. We developed country resources, we built infrastructures, we developed competencies, local contractors, capabilities. We provided energy, electricity through a number of initiatives. I'd like to mention the two in Okpai, the power plant, which are feeding, if I'm not wrong in the last statistics, more than 15 million beneficiaries. They are taking advantage of the electricity produced by Okpai Phase 1, and hopefully when Phase 2 will be up and running, this number may double. As I said, it's a stage. It's another stage than 6 decades, but the last decade was probably the most important one, because we joined Oando, an indigenous company. We learned a lot from you, and I hope that you learned a lot from us, and you are now ready to take over the operations and bring the field and the company to another stage. It is your moment, clearly. like in all the business, there are phases, and this is the moment, I think, in Nigeria for indigenous company to take the stage and continue to develop the national resources and continue to build capabilities and competencies.
Many years ago, we decided that we were going to convert our operations from being primarily a downstream company into an integrated company. And we were hoping, or we said, actually, we're not hoping, we committed to at least having 500 million barrels of reserves and 100,000 barrels a day of production, BOE of production, okay? Now, I'm happy to say that we were able to achieve that target with you in your joint venture, the 500 million barrel reserve target. The production target we're very close to achieving. However, we had the issues to do with security. But now that you've given us a platform to do, our job would be to take the company to the next level, like you've gracefully charged us with the responsibility, you know, and ensure that we can bring that cup home by having best practices, optimize our operations, and ensure that the indigenous participation in the industry can be elevated, having been able to take the benefit of 60 years of sterling performance from you in terms of being able to develop these assets. I also will take the opportunity of thanking our partners, starting with Afrexim. Afrexim has been a pivotal institution in developing local indigenous participation. In 2014, when we acquired Conoco's business for, I mean, the transaction value was 1.8 billion. I think we paid net $1.6 billion. We had 10 international banks in the syndication for the reserve-based lending. Today, we have one bank. Only one key institution, Afrexim, has stepped up to take off almost 75% of the burden that used to be carried by those internationals. And, you know, I must say that the ladies and gentlemen that run the corporation are extremely committed to developing not just African participation in the industry, but African skills, African capacity, and go beyond the call of duty towards ensuring we succeed. So I must thank, I mean, he's absent, President Orama, who's here, the EVPs who have supported us through, then the directors, Kitiwe is here present, thank you for coming. Peter is here present, Peter leads the energy practice out of Nigeria. We thank you from the bottom of our hearts for the cooperation's sincerity and support that you give us. Our new partners as well too. This is the first time of doing a long-term project with Mercuria. We've spoken a lot to Mercuria. Indeed, in 2014, Mercuria were on the expression of interest to ConocoPhillips to buy into this joint venture. So it took 10 years of dating to finally get them involved with us. This is not to say that we're polygamous, but but we're African. You know, and so thank you, Mercuria, for joining us. Your capital came to good use. Mezzanine capital is very, very difficult to come by, and oftentimes the asset has reserves, so we will get a reserve-based lending. The company has a bit of equity to do the job, but that mid-capital is oftentimes the most difficult to find, and it came in extremely handy. And to Indorama, who's also joined the facility as a syndicated partner, you know, your gas will be secured. You've done it for strategic purposes, and the work you do in terms of being able to, you know, to develop a petrochemical industry is well appreciated, because eventually, as we take for granted renewable energy sources and the demand for oil reduces and gas becomes the primary energy source, petrochemicals will always have a huge a role to play in the development of Nigeria in particular, because we have such a large gas base, and value-added products will be the the critical future.
Coming up on Channel's Business Global, Enterprise NGR, a leading policy and advocacy group for Nigeria's financial and professional services sector, has released its 2024 State of Enterprise report. Earlier in the week, I sat down with Obi Ibekwe, the CEO of Enterprise NGR, and I'll be sharing that discussion with you. And, of course, I'll be looking back at some of the biggest business news stories of the week. All of this after the break. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. I'll shortly be sharing an interview I conducted with Obi Ibekwe, the CEO of Enterprise NGR. But until then, here's a breakdown of some of the biggest business news stories of the week. X, formerly known as Twitter, has suspended its business operations in Brazil following a dispute with Supreme Court Justice Alexandra de Moraes. The increasingly controversial social media platform claims that orders from Justice de Moraes, which include threats of arrest for a legal representative and demands to remove certain content, amount to censorship. Despite closing its office, X will keep its platform accessible to Brazilian users. The decision has sparked online debate over free speech and government overreach, with the situation highlighting ongoing global tensions around content moderation. In a significant development for the UK retail scene, Ted Baker has announced the closure of all of its 31 stores across the country, marking the end of an era for the once iconic British fashion brand. This decision follows the company's entry into administration earlier this year, with the final closures bringing the total number of Ted Baker stores lost this year to 46. The closures, which began with 15 stores in April, have now culminated in the shuttering of all retail locations, affecting over 500 jobs. Despite the closures, Ted Baker products will still be available through department stores and online platforms, as Authentic Brands Group, which owns the brand's intellectual property, continues to seek new operational partners for the UK and Europe. The European Union has reduced import tariffs on Tesla vehicles manufactured in China. Previously subject to a 20.8% tariff, Tesla's electric vehicles will now face a reduced duty rate of 9%. This adjustment comes as part of the bloc's ongoing investigation into Chinese government subsidies in the EV industry, aimed at ensuring fair competition for European manufacturers. The new tariff rate, effective immediately, acknowledges Tesla's cooperation with the EU's investigation and the company's claims of receiving fewer subsidies compared to other Chinese EV manufacturers. And now to my final topic. Nigeria's financial and professional services sector has demonstrated remarkable resilience and growth, significantly contributing to the country's economy despite facing a myriad of challenges. According to the State of Enterprise 2024 report, the FPS sector, which includes banking, insurance, capital markets, asset management, pensions, non-interest finance, fintech and sustainable finance, has become a pivotal driver of national growth and development. Earlier in the week, I was joined by Obi Ibekwe, the CEO of Enterprise NGR, the leading policy and advocacy group that compiled the data. Obi Ibekwe, it's always a pleasure feasting upon your knowledge. And I was just saying to you off air, this is a really good report, you know. There's so much national distaste at the moment for obvious reasons. But I think when Nigeria is doing well, we've got to celebrate the country, the nation, those who are doing all of the hard work to make sure this happens. Before we get into the details of the report, for those who may not be familiar with Enterprise NGR, can you explain the core mission of the group and how it aligns with the broader economic goals of the nation?
Thank you, Juliana. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to connect with you. Enterprise NGR is a professional advocacy group representing Nigeria's financial and professional services sector. Now, we define the sector, the FPS sector, to include banking, insurance, capital markets, non-interest finance, asset management, pensions, fintech, professional services, that includes law, accounting, and management consulting, and finally, sustainable finance. So there are 9 segments that make up the financial and professional services sector. Our core mission as Enterprise NGR is to champion the advancement and development of Nigeria's financial and professional services sector, recognizing its pivotal role in driving economic development.
Let's get into the meat of why we're having this discussion. Your 2024 report highlights significant achievements across various subsectors of the financial and professional services. Which subsector do you believe has had the most transformative impact on Nigeria's economy in the past year, and why and how?
Traditionally, banking outperforms all other sectors of the financial and professional services sector for obvious reasons. Banking got developed much earlier and has leveraged technology to penetrate and provide various varied products, financial services. And as a result, they recorded 29% year-on-year growth in 2023 and contributed 4.6% of GDP. And that's banks and other financial institutions. And to say that in another way, banks and other financial institutions are contributing out of every 100 naira generated nationally, they're contributing 5 naira, which is quite significant. And also, they're the third highest taxpayers in the economy, in terms of tax revenue, especially with income tax and VAT.
The report is out. I don't think it's totally public yet. But what is the impact? You've got some great figures here, really important data that could skew headlines, turn things around, trickle down optimism. It appears to be a lack of communication and a lack of hope and optimism that's causing all the discernment amongst yous. What can your report do, Obi, to alleviate it? Has PEC seen it? Has the Minister of Finance seen it? Has the President seen it?
So, Juliana, you ask a very good question. First of all, let me inform you that the report is live. It's on our website, and people can go and download. And I really encourage them to read this report because it highlights that it's not all bad news in Nigeria. There is actually, in spite of the turbulent macroeconomic environment, which we believe is transitional as the policies take hold, we will start to see the gains. But the report highlights that growth indeed is happening, and in spite of these macroeconomic headwinds and across the sector. So it's not just banking. The capital market outperformed even global markets last year. I say we were top 3 or top 4 at worst, and the premier performer in sub-Saharan Africa. Fintech, in Nigeria, we had the highest number of fintech startups funded, and attracted about $400 million, into the sector. And as you know, even countries like the UK are shopping for fintech talent in Nigeria. That's how significant contribution from that sector is. So there's a number of good news that we need to take cognizance of. The pension industry is one regulatory success that Nigeria has had. Is accumulated 18 trillion in investments to provide a safety net for Nigerian employees and people who are temporarily unemployed. And currently we have more than 10 million contributors. Wow. And then the insurance sector is picking up. Gross premium written rose to the 1 trillion mark in 2023. So there's a lot that is going on, and in the not too distant future, all of that will come into play to turn things around in Nigeria. We strongly believe this, and we're working towards it.
Absolutely. We are going to tap into your infectious optimism because, of course, that's what we need so the economy can turn a corner. As you said, we're going through a transition at the moment. Really always fascinating, feasting upon your knowledge. Ms. Obi Ibekwe, who is the CEO of Enterprise NGR. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Juliana. Pleasure to be here.
you. Well, sadly, that's all we have time for you today. But as always, do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channel's Business Global. Goodbye.